Okay, let's dive into this. Welcome to the Explainer. Today, we're embarking on an exploration that is really going to challenge how we look at the news, our history, and honestly, human nature itself. We are going to bridge a massive 3,000-year gap to connect directly with our modern world by looking at the ancient prophetic books of Amos and Micah. It is absolutely fascinating how history repeats itself, so let's just get right to it.
So I want you to think about this for a second. What happens when religious performance masks systemic cruelty? It's a heavy, deeply provocative question, isn't it? We usually think of faith and morality as these protective, guiding forces in society. But what occurs when the outward appearance of being righteous is actually used as a shield? A shield to just cover up greed, exploitation, and profound unfairness? Now, this isn't just some philosophical hypothetical to ponder. This is the very core of the historical text we are examining today. And as you'll see, it's a question that demands an answer today just as urgently as it did millennia ago.
Think about the modern crises we're all facing right now. We're talking about underpaid labor and wage theft, unfair wealth hoarding while everyday people suffer, a severe lack of basic necessities like healthcare and education, bribery, rigged legal systems, and just relentless corporate greed that keeps the most vulnerable trapped in these vicious cycles of poverty. Now, you hear this list and you're probably thinking, okay, yeah, you just pulled these bullet points off the front page of this morning's news. Well, here is the incredible twist. These aren't from today's headlines at all. These are the exact specific diagnoses derived straight from those ancient biblical texts. The problems we think of as distinctly modern, they are literally thousands of years old. Moving into Section 1, Ancient Sins, Modern World, the Endurance of Oppression.
What we're dealing with here is what the source material beautifully calls the ancient mirror. It's like looking into a giant mirror across time. The ancient sins, where these prophets were intensely condemning greed and exploitation, they flawlessly reflect modern oppression, things like wage theft, bribery, and those inescapable cycles of poverty we just talked about. Honestly, it really doesn't matter what era you live in. This comparison underscores the absolute timelessness of human nature. We've essentially just upgraded from ancient tunics to modern business suits, right? But the fundamental struggles for fairness and those deeply human tendencies toward greed and exploitation, they've remained completely unchanged.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how we look at it through two very different but totally complementary lenses. On one hand, we have the prophet Amos. His focus is incredibly macro. He's looking at the big picture, structural justice, and broad social decency. And his primary target is systemic cruelty. But then, on the other hand, we have Micah, who takes a much more micro approach. His focus zooms way in on personal character and internal moral behavior, and his specific target is bad, self-serving leadership. So together, they actually give us a complete holistic picture of societal health.
Which brings us to Section 2, Amos, demanding structural fairness and the thunder of structural justice. So Amos operated on this one unshakable core conviction. You simply cannot separate how you treat people from how you worship. He fought fiercely against what's called the illusion of outward piety. This is basically the false belief that you can have these lavish lifestyles and loud religious rhetoric coexisting peacefully right alongside systemic cruelty and human suffering. Amos directed his strictest warnings that wealthy folks who were spending their resources on extravagant religious festivals while completely and intentionally ignoring the poverty and exploitation happening right outside their literal doors. Looking at this impartially, it is a massive challenge to modern societies. It demands that we look past external displays of success or really well-rehearsed religious rhetoric and aggressively fight the underlying corruption. True worship, Amos argued, absolutely cannot exist in a society built on systemic cruelty.
All right, Section 3, Micah, rebuking corrupt leadership with a piercing focus on personal character. So while Amos brought the big macro thunder, Micah was fearless in confronting the individuals, specifically self-serving politicians, leaders, and rulers. The people who prioritize their own greed and their own political survival way above actually protecting the ordinary people they were supposed to serve. His core theology is perfectly captured in chapter 6, verse 8. It says, God requires an inward change of heart and outward actions of love over empty ritualistic sacrifices. In other words, God doesn't want mechanical, robotic religious performance. You can't just go through the motions. What's actually required is a life defined by mercy and humility. It is the ultimate timeless call for substance over sacrifice. The source material actually positions Micah's message as nothing less than a literal cure for broken societies. Think about it. If our current cultures are plagued by a lack of compassion, systemic discrimination, and violence, the antidote here is crystal clear. Kindness, radical honesty, and deep empathy absolutely must become our default daily practices.
It is not enough to just sit around and hope for a better world. Micah demands that the internal character of individuals, especially our leaders, has to fundamentally shift toward radical empathy.
Section 4. The Modern Prophetic Parallel. Same monsters in modern clothes.
When you combine those macro teachings of Amos with the micro teachings of Micah, wow, they shine an incredibly bright, unyielding light on the specific intersectional crises of the modern era. The monsters we are fighting today, they are the exact same monsters they fought back then. They're just wearing modern clothes. These texts constantly condemn the drawing of lines that value one human being over another based on background, ethnicity, or race. They fiercely defend the weak and vulnerable. In our modern context, the source material shows their theology standing as an absolute condemnation of violence against women and children, demanding protection and swift justice for victims. And, finally, both prophets remind us that when leaders use power as a weapon, or just as a tool for their own self-enrichment, it is viewed as a direct affront to God. They are laying out an incredibly clear, neutral standard for basic human decency that applies completely regardless of your modern political affiliation.
Let's move to Section 5 and see how this builds into action. The mandate for action, faith beyond Sunday morning. The ultimate takeaway from analyzing Amos and Micah isn't just to gain some neat historical knowledge. It's a direct demand for real-world action. Faith and moral belief have to be demonstrated through tangible steps. We literally have to behave differently. That means actively showing mercy, justice, and humility in our workplaces and our families. We must protect the vulnerable, making our institutions safe havens and fierce advocates for the weak, the poor, and the marginalized. We have to fight internal and external corruption, ensuring leadership is actually transparent and fair. We're called to speak up against evil and oppression to promote justice, and to actively pursue peace by restoring relationships and holding real dialogues on reconciliation. It is a massive, comprehensive demand to transform what we believe internally into genuine structural and personal change.
And that brings us to a deeply provocative thought I want to leave you with today. Will faith remain just a Sunday morning concept? That ancient mirror has shown us that the systemic cruelty and leadership failures from 3,000 years ago are the exact same things we battle today. Amos and Micah, they challenge us to ensure that our ideals don't just exist as empty rituals or, nice thoughts we entertain once a week, but as actual driving forces for justice and empathy in our daily lives. So, think about how you can apply these structural and personal lessons to your own modern life. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, stay curious, and I'll see you next time.